Are the Buffalo Bills officially back? We talk about their big win over the Dallas Cowboys and so much more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. We're a daily NFL podcast, and I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher, one of the many NFL experts here on our network, the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I really appreciate everybody who was tuning in, whether in audio form or video form, and making Locked On NFL your first listen each and every day, wherever available, all podcasts and platforms. So again, if you'd like to watch in video form or if you like to listen in audio form, either way, it's the same show, both audio and video. Today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn shout out to find the qualified candidates you want to talk to. Fast to post your job for free. LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We're a 5-day-a-week NFL podcast, so bringing you the biggest stories from across the league Monday through Friday. And we're excited here on this show because we're going to be talking a lot about week 15 and Sunday's action. And it was a doozy of a day. We got a lot of big matchups, some crazy finishes. In the first part of the show, we're going to talk with Joe Marino of Locked On Bills about the Buffalo Bills, winners of 3 of their last 4. That includes in week 15 when they blew out the Dallas Cowboys 31-10. Then we'll get the other side of that story with Locked On Cowboys and Marcus Mosher. Just talk about what we should think and how we should feel about this Cowboys team. Then finally, we will move into the AFC South, where the Houston Texans pick up a very last-second win over the Tennessee Titans and keep their playoff hopes alive. We'll talk with John Hickman of Locked On Texans about that. So without any further ado, let's first get into our conversation with Joe Marino of Locked On Bills. The Buffalo Bills are trying to claw their way into the playoffs, and they got a big win over the Dallas Cowboys in week 15, a blowout 31-10. Here to talk about that with me is Joe Marino, the host of Locked On Bills. And Joe, I know the Bills have been a very up and down team this season. Looked like their year was bleak, but they have clawed their way back here. A big win over Dallas, who is one of the premier teams in the NFC. Let's start with the game itself. This was domination from front to back for Buffalo. How'd they do it?
Well, they ran the ball. I guess they ran the ball very successfully. That's obvious. James Cook over 200 yards rushing, a couple of touchdowns. I mean, the Bills ran the ball 49 times and passed it 15 times. Beat them 31-10, and that only includes one turnover by Dallas late in the game, right? So it wasn't like a bunch of short fields. I mean, the Bills legitimately just put together scoring drive after scoring drive where the offensive line was able to dominate Dallas up front, and James Cook was picking his spots and was very, very productive. And so I think that was what happened on offense, but just in totality, they were just a more physical team. They set the tone physically in this football game, and Dallas couldn't match it or even come close to it. I mean, there was a point in time there kind of late in the second quarter, at least definitely in the third quarter, where you just realized that Dallas is not really interested in matching the Bills' intensity or their physicality in the game. And they come into this game, the hottest team in football, 5 wins in a row, 40 points per game. They beat Dallas. They beat Philly, right? They're riding high. And I think Dallas did the thing that Dallas has done throughout the years is they do something good and they parlay that into an absolute disaster of a performance, and the Bills were able to put it to them.
Yeah, huge statement game. And I think you talk about, it was trippy the entire game, multiple personal foul penalties. But in this one, Joe, I think for a lot of Bills fans, one of the questions coming into the year was, what's this backfield going to look like and how is James Cook going to perform? Obviously for him, he was a monster. You mentioned the run game, 25 carries, 179, and a touchdown for James Cook. How did he in particular get it going in this game? But what have you seen out of him from the entire season?
Well, I think the Bills leaned into a lot of their core concepts running the football. They love duo. They love this dart tackle wrap play. And I think their offensive line really created a lot of displacement, headlined by Deion Dawkins, their outstanding left tackle, who had a monster of a game. But for James Cook, he's been having a great year. He came into this game third in the NFL amongst all running backs in yards from scrimmage. And unless Travis Etienne has a monster game against the Ravens on Sunday night, he will be number 2 behind only Christian McCaffrey in total yards, 7th amongst all skill players in yards from scrimmage. So he's been very quietly having a great season. This is his 5th consecutive game over 100 yards from scrimmage. So he's become a critical part of this Bills offense. And as you mentioned there, a big question mark entering the season where the Bills had the services of Devin Singletary for the last 4 seasons. And I'm not going to sit here and act like Devin Singletary is an elite NFL running back, but he's a good one. And he led the Bills in rushing the last 4 seasons. And that's no small job to come in your second season and become a lead ball carrier for an NFL team when James Cook wasn't ever a lead ball carrier in college against Georgia, right? Not necessarily a traditional build for an every down back. He's 5'11", 195 pounds. He's not necessarily built for that dense frame to carry the ball a ton, but he's had more volume than I ever anticipated. He's been really productive, and it's probably time to start talking about him as one of the 4 running backs that make the Pro Bowl for the AFC.
Yeah, and this is a team, Joe, you know what? They've won 3 of their last 4. They had the close loss to the Eagles, and that, the 2 disappointing losses to the Bengals and the Broncos might come back and loom large here as they try to fight into the playoffs. You mentioned we're recording this before the Sunday night game between Baltimore and Jacksonville. Buffalo currently sits at 9. They're behind Houston, Indianapolis, and Cincinnati for the 3 wild card spots right now. What has to happen for Buffalo to get into the playoffs here? Because they might be a team no one wants to play. With the way they're playing right now.
Surely. Yeah. I don't think anybody's going to want to play them if they can get in, but they got to get in, as you mentioned, some really goofy losses earlier in the season, to the Patriots, to the Jets, Bengals, Jaguars. They dropped the Philly game. They lost, Broncos, just really goofy losses, but a very capable team. They dug themselves in a hole, but they got a real chance here. And I think their best chance is going to come through winning the AFC East, where the Dolphins have led most of the year, but their loss to Tennessee last week really opened the door for the Bills. And so with 3 games to play for each team, they play in week 18. That's the big one, in Miami, week 18. Right now, what needs to happen is for the Bills to win their next 2 against the Chargers and the Patriots. You feel good about that. Miami just needs to lose 1. They've got Dallas and Baltimore. You feel good about that. If that happens, if the Dolphins lose 1 and the Bills win both, week 18 in Miami is for the AFC East and obviously the right to host a playoff game. And so if the Bills can't get in with the wild card, they've got a fairly clear path to the division, but also keeping in mind, if they do win out, that's an 11-win football team. I think there might be a 10-win team in the AFC that doesn't make it. I don't think there's going to be an 11-win football team that doesn't make it. So it's right there for the Bills, right? I mean, a trying season for sure. They entered this week 7-6, the 11th seed in the AFC, but they still have a real chance to get in. And like you mentioned there, Kevin, I don't think anyone's really going to want to play him, especially when you consider who are going to be the quarterbacks in the AFC that really have the playoff experience, right? Like, I mean, we're talking about like Jake Browning and Gardner Minshew. Like, these are potential playoff quarterbacks. Tua's never played a playoff game, right? I mean, it's Lamar Jackson has a little bit of experience in the playoffs, right? I mean, Mahomes, of course, but it's not the field that we thought it was going to be with no Herbert, with no Joe Burrow, right? Like, it's a different landscape. And if the Bills get in, they can really wreck the party.
Yeah. So going off of that point, I mean, even the Mahomes, the road playoff game element,
never done it.
A bunch of uncertainty. So where do you feel like the Bills, if they can get in, how dangerous of a team would they be? Who would you take over Buffalo right now with the way they're playing in the playoffs?
Well, I mean, it's talking about playoff experience, a battle-tested Bills team. I mean, they're one of only 2 teams in the NFL that's won a playoff game in each of the last 3 seasons, the Bills and the Chiefs. That's it, right? They've paid their dues, right? So you feel like if they get in right there, they could really take advantage of the opportunity. And they've certainly had some disappointing playoff losses, but like I said, they're one of only 2 teams in the league, in the entire league, with playoff win in each of the last 3 seasons. So I think they're dangerous. I don't think you can assume anything, but you got a top flight quarterback. You got a team that's battle tested. Get in and see what happens.
And if you want to, obviously the playoffs are the number one thing on the Bills' minds right now, right? But what do you want to see from them over the final 3 weeks of the year? What do you want them to shore up?
I think for me, it's some of the passing game stuff. Joe Brady has replaced Ken Dorsey as the offensive coordinator. It's been 4 games. It's been really good. I don't have a whole lot to complain about, but there's been some passing game missed opportunities is what I would call it, whether it's a high drop rate. Drops have been just insane for the Bills lately. You saw it in this game. Josh Allen only threw 15 passes, but I'd probably charge the Bills with 4 or 5 drops along the way. And then you look back at some of these other games, just not on the same page with some of the receivers, the outside receivers. And I never thought we'd be at this point in the season and thinking, wow, can Josh Allen get it going with Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis, right? Like that's kind of not been good over the last 4 or 5 games. And so I think they got to clean up some of that in the passing game. I think they have to shore up some special team stuff that's been a little bit leaky at times this year. And then, I continue to be opportunistic on defense and stay healthy. And I think if those things can kind of come together, the Bills have a real chance to wreck the party here.
Joe's awesome. And the Bills, look at them. They are trying to claw their way back up there in a very crowded AFC playoff race. And for more on the Bills, check Joe's workout over the Locked On Bills podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up in the second part of the show, we'll be talking about the other side of that Bills-Cowboys game with Mosher of Locked On Cowboys. And think about what we should feel about this Cowboys team. Stay tuned for that. Plenty to talk about on Locked On NFL. First, this show is sponsored by LinkedIn. And when you're hiring for small businesses, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And LinkedIn has helped me out a ton throughout my professional career, finding jobs, connecting. It's big for connections as well. And I've had a bunch of positive experiences. Plus, it's really important to have quality candidates to both interview and hire. It's really easy because LinkedIn Jobs makes it really easy to find them. And LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which make it the best place to hire. And hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates, right? So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get qualified candidates within 24 hours. And LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats, it might not have time or resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. So post your job for free at LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. That's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We're back our second segment of Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher still rocking out with you here on this Monday. We just talked with Joe Marino of Locked On Bills. Now let's talk with Mosher of Locked On Cowboys, as the Cowboys were on the unfortunate end of that 31-10 blowout. We'll talk with Marcus about what the Cowboys need to do moving forward and what we should think about them now. Well, the Dallas Cowboys lose the Buffalo Bills in Week 15, 31-10. Here to talk about that with me is Marcus Moser, the host of Locked On Cowboys, and one of them alongside Landon McCool, who we talked with last week. And Marcus, a bit of a different tone here than last week's game, where Dallas looked dominant. This week, not so much. I mean, what went wrong for Dallas here from start to finish?
First of all, I love that Landon gets to do the positive stuff, and I've got to come on here and do the negative show. But everything went wrong for the Cowboys in this game. The defense couldn't stop the run. Special teams had penalties that extended drives. The offense couldn't get going. It was just a complete no-show for the Cowboys, who really needed a big road win. They haven't really got one this season. And this might have been their worst loss of the season.
And I think that a lot of people were having conversations about, hey, is Dak, after a rough start to the season, and played his way into the MVP conversation? Obviously, those conversations have died down after this past game. But what have you kind of made of Dak's season so far, and how far do you think he can take the Cowboys based off of what you've seen for the entire year?
Yeah, I mean, going into this week, according to our friends at FanDuel, Dak was the MVP favorite by quite a bit. So it wasn't that we just thought he was having a really good year. He was our MVP, favorite. I thought he's been outstanding. This was just a really bad game all the way around. He wasn't seeing the field clearly. They couldn't create plays down the field. When they did run the ball, they got penalties. I'm not going to read too much into one bad game on the road. But the concerning thing here, Kevin, is we've seen now multiple games where this offense just doesn't show up on the road. San Francisco, they were embarrassed. Arizona earlier in this year, they did not play well. I would like to see the Cowboys have some kind of answers about why are they struggling so much on the road against better teams.
And I think part of the conversation about this game, Marcus, too, was the physicality for the full 60 minutes, multiple late hits, 2 on Dak Prescott early here. What have you made about the Cowboys' physicality this season, and specifically in this game?
They can be a physical team. I don't think Buffalo is the most physical team in the world, right? Like, their offensive line is good. I don't think James Cook is a really good player, but when you think of him, I don't think you necessarily think of a big power physical back in the mold of whoever, like a Jerome Bettis or an Adrian Peterson. No, he's just a really good all-around player. Cowboys are just getting moved off the ball. They were getting fooled by Buffalo's formations. Guys were in the wrong spots. Guys weren't tackling at the second level. Just a really poor performance by them on defense.
And this moves Dallas now, obviously. They were in the conversation. They're still in the conversation for whether you want to call it the 1 seed or the NFC East title. Obviously, it's kind of a group, right? In the NFC, it's San Francisco, Philly, and Dallas. And after that win last week, we were kind of talking, all right, where does Dallas rank among those 3 teams now? You have a great game last week, a bad game this week. Where do you kind of put Dallas in the NFC conversation right now?
I mean, I still probably put them 2, but it just feels like the gap between them and the Eagles and then the 49ers is starting to really widen. 49ers are the best team in the conference. And honestly, it'll be kind of a shame if the 49ers don't win the NFC because they're so much better than everybody else. I don't think this Cowboys loss drops them behind the Eagles. I certainly don't think it puts them in a tier below the Eagles. It's just the Cowboys and Philly still fighting to try to see who can go to San Francisco and probably lose in the conference championship game.
And I remember we've talked about it, Marcus. Landon and I have talked about it too. Mike McCarthy has been quite a conversation point in Dallas over the past couple of seasons. I know we talked before the season about how hot was the season. I'm not going to ask you that right now, but how good of a season has he had considering Dak's early struggles, getting him back on track and being a part of a Dallas team now that I still think is a contender in the NFC here?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really good season. The Cowboys are probably going to end up with 12 wins, which would be the 3rd straight year that they've won 12 or more games. Mike McCarthy is a really good coach. Now, is he going to be the coach that's good enough to get you past Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers or get you to the Super Bowl? We'll see. But there's no doubt that Mike McCarthy knows how to win a lot of games in the NFL. He just needs his team to be a little bit better when it comes to playing on the road.
And I think for a lot of people, Marcus, you look at what happened with Trevon Diggs early in the season. We obviously know the legend of Deron Bland in Dallas now. But this Dallas defense still, they've been good for the entire season here. But what do you want to see more of from them, especially after a loss like this?
Just a sense of urgency. There was a lot of players, especially in the second half, that were making some business decisions when it came to taking on blocks and making tackles. They play the Miami Dolphins next week in Miami, who they can run the ball. We know that Raheem Mostert and Devin Achane have combined for over 2,000 rushing yards this year. I believe 27 rushing touchdowns between those two. You're going to get another test this week. I want to see how the Cowboys come back after an embarrassing loss like this. Do they let the Miami Dolphins run all over them, or do they respond and step up to the challenge?
And you mentioned the Miami game. You mentioned that they'll probably end the year with 12 wins here, that final 3-game stretch. The Dolphins, the Lions, and the Commanders, each of those games, you got to go out there and win them. What are you expecting to see from Dallas over those last 3?
Yeah, so only one of those games is at home, and that's the Lions game. I do expect the Cowboys to play better. The weather is going to be better in the next couple of games, and I think that'll help. I expect the Cowboys to play one of their better games of the season this week against Miami. Will it be enough? We'll see. This Kyle Shanahan, I know it's Mike McDaniel, but the Shanahan offense has given the Cowboys a lot of problems over the last couple of years with Dan Quinn as the defensive coordinator. I want to see if they've made any improvements since the last time they faced this style of an offense. Should be must-see TV on Christmas Eve.
And you mentioned the road woes for Dallas. They're 3-4 on the road this year compared to 7-0 at home. How concerned are you at that trend if they do have to go to San Francisco, if they do have to play a couple road games here in the playoffs?
I'm very concerned. Listen, the Cowboys are very likely to be the 5 seed, which means you're going to be playing on the road in the playoffs. Now, maybe I'm expecting them to beat Tampa Bay or New Orleans or Atlanta in round 1, but very good chance that you have to go to San Francisco in round 2. If not, you're going to be going to Philly in round 2. They have not proven that they can beat those teams on the road. They really haven't even shown that they can be all that competitive. I would love to see that trend reversed. The Cowboys have 2 games coming up on the road to show that, hey, they aren't just a home dominant team.
We'll see what this Cowboys team does. Obviously still one of the elite teams in the NFC, but where they stand in the NFC now is a little more cloudy. For more on Marcus, though, check him out over the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here, your team every day. Coming up, we'll talk about the Houston Texans. We've been talking about them all year. CJ Stroud has been brilliant, but the Texans pulled off a brilliant win without him. We'll talk with John Hickman about that and more coming up next year on Locked On NFL. First, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. And as the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot. Over on FanDuel right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options that include spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. So there are plenty of games yesterday. Josh Allen didn't really throw the ball, as we talked about with Joe in the first part of the show here, but maybe you pick James Cook over. James Cook, anytime touchdown scorer. You're probably living pretty if you pick James Cook and any props involving him. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. We're back rounding out Locked On NFL here on Monday. Kevin Mosher still talking with you here. Thank you again so much for being here with us on Locked On NFL and making us your first listen each and every day. Be sure to subscribe in video form and audio form as well for 5-day-a-week NFL content. We go over the biggest stories, latest news, analysis, and so much more here on the show. But let's now get into our final conversation of this episode. John Hickman of Locked On Texans joins us to talk about that Houston Texans team that I think expectations were low to start the season. They're in the thick of the AFC, and they pulled off a big one over the Titans in overtime. Let's talk about it with John now. Well, at this point in the season, every game is a big game. The Houston Texans had a big one against the Tennessee Titans on Sunday, and it came down to the literal last second in overtime with a game-winning field goal. Looked like it was going to be a tie for a while, but the Texans pull it out at the end. They moved to 8-6. Here to talk about that with me and how sneaky this Texans team is John Hickman of Locked On Texans. And John, you know, we've talked a bunch this year, and a lot of it's been about C.J. Stroud, how good he's looked as a rookie. But they were without C.J. Stroud in this one. He missed this game. It was the Case Keenum show. And despite that, despite how good Will Levis has looked over the past month, they shut down the Titans' run game. The defense looked really good. They pulled it off. What was the key for the Texans to win this one?
The key for the Texans to win this game was what you just said, the Texans' defense. Throughout this year, we're week 16 now, week 15, you know, DeMeco Ryans came over from San Francisco. We know how good of a defense that has been under DeMeco Ryans when he was the defensive coordinator. We hadn't seen that this year from Houston defensively, not for a full game, right? We've seen that for full games while he was in San Francisco. We have not seen that for full games here in Houston. Maybe a drive here, maybe a half here, right? Maybe you have moments and spurs, but for 4 quarters and overtime, this Houston Texans defense registered 7 sacks, the high on the year. It was 6 against Carolina, 7 sacks, 12 tackles for loss, 11 QB hits, 6 pass deflections, 1 interception, a couple of interceptions, by the way. And for King Derrick Henry, this man has been running wild on Houston the last 5 times. Every time Derrick Henry has played the Houston Texans in his last 5 games, over 200 yards. The Houston Texans held Derrick Henry to 0.6 yards per carry. They held the Tennessee Titans to 2.2 yards per carry, right? So you look at a team defensively that had a lot of question marks coming into this game. Will the linebackers be able to rebound and bounce back from last week's game? Yes, they did. How will the secondary play? I thought this was Jalen Petre's best game of the year. Dropped interception, which I know he probably really wanted, does not have any on the year. But he also had a huge pass breakup to DeAndre Hopkins for 42 yards, which would have put the Tennessee Titans in scoring position. Knocked that out, right? He's been having a tough year. So to see him kind of bounce back and get into his own form. But overall, the front 4, Khalil Davis, the undrafted, the D tackle that was brought over from Tampa Bay. He played in the XFL or something like that this year. Jonathan Gennard, he earned a lot of money. He was up for an extension this offseason. Derek Barnett just signed him from waivers. You know, he spent some time in Philly this year. Malik Collins was balling out. Everybody got in on the action for the front 4, and I think that really rattled rookie quarterback Will Levis. I think he was rattled early and often, and I think once he got rattled, he was not able to get set. They beat up on the offensive line all 4 quarters and the free football at the end in the overtime. They didn't allow the offensive line to get comfortable. They were not able to get a push from the offensive line. If I'm the Tennessee Titans, I'm looking at my offensive line. So we didn't get a push. That's because the D tackles dominated in the interior. The edge guys played discipline, right? They were just beating up on guys the Tennessee Titans did have some injuries, but they lived in the backfield, right? And then maybe the best game from Christian Harris, the second-year man out of Alabama, linebacker who, you saw if you've been around Houston, maybe training camp throughout the season, you've seen how much DeMeco Ryans has taken to him. Alabama linebacker, right? And he struggled at some point throughout the year early on, but he's gotten better week in and week out. This was his best performance of the year. So when you ask how did the Houston Texans win this game? Defense. This was the true definition of a swarm defense. This is what the swarm defense and swarm mentality embodies. They went out there and held this Tennessee Titans team, the offense, to only 9 points. The other 7 came from a pick six. 9 points, 3 field goals. And this was a hot Tennessee team who just came out for beating the Miami Dolphins, who just put up 30 points.
And I mean, look, with how crowded the AFC right now is, John, in the playoff picture, this was a needed win for the Texans if they had dropped it.
Very much so.
Would have been huge if they had lost it. And on the offensive side of the ball, even though this was the defensive game, we just got into it, it feels like the Texans have weapons now. We've talked about CJ, how good he's been, but we were kind of talking earlier in the season about, well, is it going to be Devin Singletary or Dameon Pierce? It's obviously Devin Singletary's backfield now. He had the touchdown called back late, but still put up 4.7 yards per carry. And then without Tank Dell and Nico, all these guys, right? You have Noah Brown stepping up, Dalton Schultz, Robert Woods. How is this Texans pass catching group, the run game, how has it supported the quarterback, whether it's CJ Stroud or in this case, Case Keenum, who's been in the game for him this season? I
still think Houston has question marks with the pass catchers with Tank Dell out, right? We saw the moment Tank Dell went out a couple of games ago, it was the Nico Collins show. Once Nico Collins went down, no wide receiver was able to get separation and impact the game for the quarterback. So I still believe that there's question marks moving ahead for the Houston Texans to close out the last 3 games.
Yeah, and for a team now in Houston that's, again, trying to punch their way into the playoff picture right now, we're recording this before the Sunday night game between Jacksonville and Baltimore. So, look, Texans are not out of it, whether it comes to the AFC South or the wild card picture. But you look at that picture, John, and there are probably 5-6 teams that are still in the hunt and probably 2 or 3 really good ones that aren't going to make it. How important is this final 3-game stretch here? Because the Texans have to play some of that competition that's ahead of them right now.
Yeah, so the Texans have to play because right now they are sitting right outside with the 8 seed. The Texans have to close this season out. The Cleveland Browns, they're in right now, who had a comeback victory over the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears, please invest in some wide receivers. You had one, but what happened? I don't know. You got to figure that out. The Tennessee Titans again. Now, they are eliminated, but that is going to be a home game for Houston, and they always play each other hard. That's going to be a tough game, a must-win, because they have to win that game to stay afloat. But I think for Houston, it's going to come down to the January 7th the January 7th Indianapolis game on the road. I think that's what's going to come down to whether or not Houston gets in. But they got to beat the Cleveland Browns. They got to beat the Titans. They got to win out. And Cleveland has an easy schedule to close out their year. They got Houston. They got the Jets. And they got Cincinnati with no Joe Burrow. I mean, Jake Brown has been playing very, very good for him. But, I mean, that's a winnable maybe 2 out of 3 games, depending on how we view the Houston Texans, maybe 1 out of 3. Houston has to do their job. They control their own destiny. I know that's cliche, but that's the facts. They got to win out, and they got to pray that the Colts drop 1. The Colts got to drop 1 because they have the Falcons, the Raiders, and then Houston. Easy. It's important for them to win out. Very important.
We've talked with John a lot this year, and again, it's been usually about CJ Stroud, but a big win without him keeps the Texans in the playoff conversation. And for more on John's work, check him out. Locked On Texans, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked On NFL. Thank you so much for tuning in. Coming up tomorrow, more NFL content with your Tuesday host. So be sure to stay tuned for that. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On NFL.